All right, this is the video I would have wanted, or at least I hope this is the video I would have wanted when I first tried to turn a bowl. It was a disaster. In fact, the first couple times were disasters. So let's talk about the tools first. You do not need all these tools. The first two tools I'm going to show you are spindle roughing gouges. Now I had those two tools and I tried to turn a bowl with them and was highly unsuccessful. But those tools are generally used to take a lot of stock material off of things. This is the tool I wish I had first. It's a 1/2 inch bowl gouge, and this has what we call an Irish grind. Now, if you look, the corner doesn't stick up, it's pulled back. When we compare this to the roughing gouge, nothing on this bowl gouge there is catching my thumb. But on the roughing gouge, there's that sharp corner. And that sharp corner is what's going to catch when you're turning a bowl. This is a larger version of that bowl gouge, again with a fingernail or Irish grind, not quite as pulled back as the other one. And this one's handle alone probably weighs 4 or 5 pounds. It's really beefy. This tool here is a parting gouge. It has a sharp tip and you plunge it into the wood to make straight cuts. You'll see where that becomes important later. This tool's similar to that other one, but this is a carbide blade you can change up. You don't need to resharpen, and it's slightly curved at the end, so it doesn't make a purely flat cut, but it catches less. This is a negative rake scraper. I don't even know if I use this in the project, but it's really good if you get a lot of tear out in the wood. It makes a nice, really clean cut. The pile with 3 on the left are tools that are very affordable and came in a set. The tools on the right were far more expensive. 2 of them have carbide blades that are rather expensive, and this one I'm showing you now was originally longer, but over many sharpenings has been ground down. This is, of course, the most expensive tool in the group. It's easy to switch the piece out. That piece actually stores in the handle at the bottom, and the tool itself is massive. Now you don't need all these tools. I could turn the whole bowl with just the smaller bowl gouge, but it helps to have some variety. You can see a pile of other wood to be turned. This particular blank, though, is coming from a tree that was in my front yard. We've milled it down, and you can actually see some of the red paint, which I use to seal ends of the wood once you've cut it out of the tree. This keeps the wood from checking or creating less cracks than it would otherwise. We're now going to remove the chunk of antique knob that was still on the faceplate from last time. And that's what this device is called, a faceplate. It screws into whatever wood you're using, and you then screw that faceplate to your lathe. You're now seeing me add a center finder. So this little device is just a circle that fits in my faceplate, and it has a little pin in the middle. Once we've made the middle of the circle, we put that pin into that middle circle, and we know where to screw. We're putting in some smaller screws here since the bowl is smaller, and that's going to enable us not to punch through or hit those screws while we're working. In a moment, you'll see some of that paint on the blank, and the red is really important because I used red because I had red paint laying around. Doesn't matter what paint you just use it. Now this is an interesting little device. You'll see me stick this little magnet onto the lathe. That locks the arm in place, so that locks the thing from spinning. When I take it off, it's allowed to spin again. Now you could just hold it in with your finger, but someone online made this cool little magnet, and I stole their idea. Wish I could give them credit. For the first few cuts, as I'm roughing this out, I'm going to keep the bowl gouge in the shape of a letter U. It's going to remove a lot of material. But very quickly, once I've roughed it out, I'll switch to a side angle and start riding along that wood. When I learned to rock climb, I realized that all the technique classes in the world weren't helping me. What was helping me climb better was climbing more, like 5 or 6 days a week for hours a day. And I would argue that working on a lathe is the same thing. I've taken a few classes, but the best thing you can do is just get on the lathe and make a mess. A big decision has to be made at this point. We're starting to clean up the bottom of the bowl. This will ultimately be that bottom. And do I want to cut a mortise or do I want to cut a tenon? In this case, we're going to choose a mortise. That's a cut into the bottom of the bowl, and we'll place a chuck in it and expand the chuck against that hole. The advantage here, less cleanup at the end. There's nothing wrong with cutting a tenon. That's a piece that sticks out and the chuck grabs around it. In fact, in some ways, that's easier or gives a stronger hold oftentimes. But then you've got to clean it up at the end, and for newbies, that can be rather tricky. So we've already got a bowl shape on the outside of this bowl. This is kind of a classic sort of cereal bowl shape. And if you look, The area for our mortise isn't very deep, so we're actually going to take that in a little more to get a little more bite from our chuck jaws. We're going to want to make it a little thinner, cut back towards that mortise. There's a challenge, however. If we cut off too much material around that mortise, when we put the chuck into it and open up those jaws, it's going to crack. Now we could leave this just like it is on the outside and leave this sort of basic bowl shape, but I think we're going to want to make this a little more angled here. What you can see me marking with the pencil is the wood we want to remove. Now we could go in right now and remove all that wood, but then when the chuck is in that mortise and it pushes out, there's only a little bit of wood to hold and likely it will break. So we're going to spin this around, we're going to mount it up the other way, and then we're going to remove that material when it's faced in the other direction. Here's a close-up of that magnet pin. It's just a piece of wood screwed onto a very strong magnet, and it goes right on that little red spot there. And that'll allow us to lock the lathe in place so it won't spin. Right there, locked. Now we've got this key. It goes right in the back of the faceplate. And it's because the arm is locked, it'll now spin and come right off. We're now going to remove that, and we're going to put our chuck on. Now this chuck isn't just a regular chuck. It was made for a smaller lathe. So I have a little adapter. So the chuck normally sits back a little bit closer to the headstock. That's that big beefy piece that spins the actual material. But in this case, it just sits out a little bit further with the adapter on. So the way a chuck works, just has an Allen wrench in this case, and there's two spots for it. Put the Allen wrench in, spin it to the left, it opens the jaws, spin it to the right, closes the jaws. You might be trapping material on the inside of the jaws or pushing out against it like we're going to do with this mortise. So we loosen it up, and then it's ready to take our bowl. Now we've got our tailstock moved up, it's dead center on our bowl. There's a lever on the back, we push forward to lock it in place. Then we're going to crank this little wheel just to get some extra pressure into that wood. Ready to roll. And this is where having that bowl gouge without those edges really makes a difference from trying to do it with a roughing gouge. Trust me, been there, done that. deep enough into this bowl and it's round enough that I feel okay removing the tailstock. That means we're going to try to cut off that little tenon or nub or whatever you want to call it. So I'm using a variety of tools to chip it away. All right, we finally got it. We're going to clean up a little bit more, and then we're going to remove that tailstock completely. Oftentimes that center of a bowl can be just slightly convex, sticking up a little bit. And visually, you might not notice until you put finish on it. So make sure you run your hand over it and make sure the bottom of that bowl truly is flat. If you rely on sandpaper forever, it's going to limit your ability to make great cuts. But at the beginning of your journey, just use the sandpaper. Maybe you'll leave some scratches if you're not great at it, but you'll get to make some bowls that you can actually use, and that will really make you enjoy the process and want to make more. And every time you make another bowl, you're working on your skills, getting a little bit better, and producing something you can use and enjoy. Now, I have a really hard time building new things, having them look perfect, and then seeing them get a scratch. I know there's one maker out there who just takes like a wrench or an awl and just dents or scratches anything he's got and figures, hey, it's got a little scratch in it, I can use it now. There's also something called, well, I'll let someone else say it for me.
Kintsugi, also referred to as kintsukuroi. English pronunciation, kintsugi.
All right, I think I can say that, kintsugi. What that is a Japanese art of filling a crack with gold. So you actually enhance the crack you have and make it more beautiful by adding the gold. This is something I started doing with bowls, and you're going to see me do it now using some mother of pearl. Why did I start doing this? Well, when I first started making bowls, I was probably losing 4 out of every 5 bowls. Some would completely blow up on the lathe, definitely due to user error. But some were just simple cracks or things I could have fixed if I knew what I was doing. So when I first started, I used a lot of epoxy fill. These were for bigger structural issues. But in this case, or in the case of a small crack, I tend to use CA glue because it's a little bit easier to control, less messy for sure, and you don't need that structural support. Usually I'll do it in a crack that already exists, but if there's a bowl like this where one doesn't exist, we can just artificially make one like you're seeing me do with the Dremel tool. Either way, I'll usually break out the Dremel and thicken the crack or enhance the crack to work best for whatever material I'm filling it in with. All right, we've sanded up through the grits, and now we're looking back at that mother of pearl area. So we've really got to check and make sure is that the inlay is stuck in there, that there's no loose pieces. So we're going to tap on it, poke at it. We're going to do a quick water pop here just to see what it looks like when we put finish on it. We're going to grab a piece of sandpaper and just do a little more sanding right up to the edge of that inlay. So just trying to clean up any of the CA glue that might have spilled and make sure that we end up with a really beautiful finished product.
Can't you hide? Leave you out. No, I'm nowhere. Oh, you're gone. I can't you hide? Believe you know. No, I'm nowhere. Oh, you're gone. I can't you hide? Believe you know. No, I'm nowhere. Oh, you're gone.
So the bottom of our bowl is actually flat. Sometimes you get done and it's a little wobbly. If you place it on a large piece of sandpaper on a flat surface and work back and forth, you'll be able to flatten that bowl off really quickly. But in this case, we don't need to. So we're just going to keep working on finishing it. An early question I used to get is, how many coats of finish does it take? And the answer, of course, is, well, it depends. How much durability do you want? What kind of look are you going for? What is the use of this bowl? Is it functional or more cosmetic? In this case, this is more of an art piece. This is not a day-to-day bowl we're going to be using for cereal. So I'm going to use a shellac finish, and I'm going to do a whole lot of thinned out coats to make it look beautiful, but I'm not expecting it to do a lot of work in its life. Now, with shellac, you really don't need to sand much in between coats. Each coat sort of bonds to the coat under it, but every now and then I like to grab the 1000 grit sandpaper and scratch it all up. You don't need to work with the grain, you don't need to worry about direction or anything. You just scratch it up and then put your next surface on there. This will ensure that by the time you've done your last coat, the bowl has a really buttery, smooth feel. And that's it. You've made your first bowl. Congratulations, you're done. Yes, a lot of people will rough turn a bowl and let it sit and then pick it up a year later and work on it. But if you're doing something small and thin and you don't mind a little natural warping, you can make a bowl in one day. So this is the foot of our bowl, and as you can see, visually it's still pretty round. But let's check it against something that's more circular. All right, we've taken our bowl and put it onto a glass Pyrex bowl we have. It's just a little bit bigger than the wood bowl. Visually, again, we are almost dead even. All right, so has the bowl warped? Almost assuredly some wood movement has occurred, but it looks beautiful. It's still circular shaped. If we test it, it doesn't rock as you move it back and forth. Top is perfectly flat. It looks like a bowl. It'll function like a bowl. And if there's a little bit of shrinkage, just say it was swimming in a cold pool. Now get out there, get on your lathe, and make something. And if you break it, now you know how to fix it. Thanks for watching.